Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Common Sense Guys channel. How are you all doing today? And yes, today we are going to be talking about Black Lives Matter and the protests, the damage, the sheer amount of numbers that seem to have been flouting all of the lockdown rules, all rolled up into one, the violence against the police, and is it justified or is it not justified? Now, I can already preface this video with no to all of those questions, but hey, let's actually try and find out what's going on and put a little bit of, should we say, statistics, data, and some citations to what I'm actually stating, shall we? Because at the end of the day, I feel that this needs to be addressed. The amount of people that are raging against the racist police in the UK seems to stem from the idea of what is happening in the US, rather than it actually being any sort of form of understanding of what's going on in the UK. The idea of world media seems to be influencing the idea of what is happening in the UK from the US, when, as any common sense person would actually understand, the US is completely different and operates completely different to the UK. In actual fact, the UK has much better policing in the understanding of de-escalation training and situations like that. But let's actually get into the video and find out what's going on. Because let's talk about the actual sheer absurdity of the numbers that are going in, and apparently how lockdown is still in effect for everybody else, but apparently isn't in effect for people that are going out and protesting. Because even though you can understand the reasoning and rationale why people are protesting, we are in a pandemic. We have been calling for people to lose their jobs for flouting or obfuscating the rules of the lockdown. If it's one rule for one, why is it not the same rule for these guys? Let's get into it, shall we, guys? So before we actually get straight into the video, let's take a second and realise that the beginning of this stemmed from George Floyd and the obvious murder that was committed by the police officer Derek Chauvin, and maybe the accomplishment or accomplices of the other three police officers with Derek Chauvin. So let's take a second just to realise that this is where all of the anger stemmed from. But in actual fact, the anger in itself can be stemmed back to Colin Kaepernick's Take a Knee. Now, I actually think that the peaceful protest itself, the Take a Knee, at the time I thought was a bit disrespectful, but at the same time I understood why that they were doing it. I understood the reasons why they were taking the knee, to try and get people involved, to try and understand what was going on. So let's take that all into context of the time that that's been happening. It's not just something that's just been swelled and then has been erupted by George Floyd. It has been swelling for quite a while. So it's something that definitely needs to be talked about. And I am not somebody that is going to sit here and say that the police do an amazing job 100% of the time. They do not. But unfortunately, it is a job that is needed in our society and is needed throughout the whole of society. Because unfortunately, human nature isn't the best. Especially with people that are saying that they're there for social change and are looking after people and wanting people to have social change. But hey, we'll get into that very shortly. So let's now move on to the fact of how many people are actually supposedly attending. And a lot of people, at least the news and speculation, is saying at least tens of thousands of people. Now, in some of the pictures that I have seen, you could argue that it's between 20 to 30, maybe even up to 50,000. Now, even if it's 1,000 people that attended this, all of them, by doing so, have broken the social distancing lockdown rules. Now, if history is to tell us anything about how the media have reacted to these types of people actually breaking these rules, then you would see the media completely and utterly condemning all of these people for breaking the rules, right? No? Oh. Okay then. So you would actually expect them to be able to draw comparisons between the idea of how many people are so scared about sending their children back to school, for instance, but are okay with their teenagers and young adults going out and protesting among tens of thousands of protesters in small areas confined to each other and by each other, but that's okay. But sending your kids back to school, god damn it, that's way too scary, ladies and gentlemen. That's way too scary. And before people jump on me, I do understand that the actual idea of it is different in the aspect of, yeah, but people were protesting against the perceived idea of how evil the UK police are and to show solidarity with everybody else in the US. I get that. The point isn't the reasons behind the protest, it's the fact that you will find reasons to break these social conditions and lockdowns. But yet, when it comes to the point of actually phasing in safe, secure reasoning and rationale to take people back to school, you scream and shout that it's not goddamn safe to do so, yet support this with tens of thousands of people in small areas wholeheartedly. Is that not hypocrisy in its own definition? I suppose anybody that is of a rational disposition should not think about that question for too long, as it will draw to a complete and utter conclusion on that one, which I hope is similar to how I've set this out. But let's move on to the actual protest, should we? We can see that there's loads of people that are there. They've broke all of the social conditioning and social lockdown rules. But obviously nothing is going to happen to them. Whether or not it should, it's a complete another question. But let's talk about the fact of the police that were involved with actually doing with this, right? So there have been pictures and videos of police officers taking a knee. Now, whether or not that you agree with the police officers taking a knee is neither here or there. Me personally, if you want my opinion, I think it shows them as being human. It shows a sense of solidarity. But unfortunately, it also shows a sense of weakness and also shows a sense of their humanity, if you will, and a way of being able to fight against that, if you will. And I think that's where we are at this minute in time. Because of the officers taking a knee and so on and so forth, it has been a case of the protesters, or some of them, mind you, it is a minority of them, and it is no way indicative of the whole group or movement. No way indeed. But yet, our media and even people on the internet are still not calling these types of people out. Now, it's very telling that even when the media themselves actually have to run away from the protesters because they're scared of the protesters. Now, if you don't believe me, I will play this video for you in its entirety.
Take you now to London, where thousands of people are gathering in protest as we go to air. And Europe correspondent Ben Avery has more. Ben, there have just been some clashes with police. What's happening where you are?
Guys, there's actually a bit of a clash with us here at the moment, and okay, guys, so what's happened, we've been trying to walk away from the danger here, but it's been following us. The police...
Goodness me, I mean, this just goes to show.
News! On the news today!
Okay, I mean, that just goes to show how dangerous it is for our reporters, for all journalists on the street at the moment trying to cover these riots when emotions are running so high. It's good to see you've got police there now. Ben's dropped his microphone.
Knees up, knees up, knees up!
That has come out of nowhere, that. We know these protests have been going on this last hour or so, but that level and turning on the media like that, boy, that is not good. We'll try and get in touch with Ben as soon as we possibly can, but he was told to go.
So yeah, we can see that a news media outlet from Australia is reporting on the news, trying to sort out what's going on, and yet the whole protesters, which they themselves call rioters, are chasing after the news while calling them fake news and everything else like that. Now, obviously, as you can tell, nothing actually happened to the media, and they were just chasing after them. Now, you could infer that there is going to be something that would have happened to them. Maybe, maybe not. The point is that the media were that scared, that intimidated, were told by their security staff to run because the security staff were scared that something was going to happen to the media. Make of that what you will, because what I'm going to do now is show you something very, very similar where we have two police officers that are in the exact same predicament. Now, please watch this all the way through if you can.
The Jets are getting fucked up. The Jets are getting fucked up. The Jets are getting fucked up. They're dashing. They're dashing. The Jets are dashing. I suck your dad. The Jets are dashing. I suck your mum. Suck your mum. Oh my days! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Won't stop! Won't stop! Oh shit!
Yeah, that really seemed that was a protest to be able to change the minds of the police and change the systemic racism that tends to apparently be in the UK police force, didn't it? That really seemed that it had any sort of logical point of protesting, didn't it? It almost seemed like it was actually thuggish behaviour to try and fight back towards the police, didn't it? Now, again, the police don't always do a good job, and sometimes they take their powers too far. But this is downright and out just going against the police because they are police. Not because they have actually done anything wrong at this particular time. But we will get into it even more, as what we can do is there is a story where they are talking about police officers that are actually being punched, being kicked, actually being physically beaten. And I want to show you actually how that all began, because the media doesn't actually show how the altercation actually began. So let's show you how the altercation actually began, which you'll be very surprised by what side actually instigates the violence. But hey, let's see it without me putting any of my opinion involved first, shall we? Now, I'm sure you can see that the gentleman in question has jumped a barrier, which is to separate the protesters from the police, and is now interacting with the police over the other side of the barrier. Now, watch what happens at this minute in time, remembering that the protester has entered a place in which he's not supposed to. So, as you can see, the agitator that jumped the barrier was successful in agitating the police and causing people to scream, to shout, to try and step and intervene, when in actual fact the police were actually doing what their job entails and arresting people that are provocateurs. The ones that are inciting, yeah, that's their job to do that. Watch what happens as it escalates. So now you have more and more people starting to step in to try and protect the provocateur, the one that was the instigator to try and get things to kick off, to start a form of a riot, to start that hatred towards the police. Remembering earlier on as well that these bunch of police are actually taking a knee in solidarity with the protesters. But now everybody's fighting with each other because of provocateur. Now, there are other instances on other clashes between the police and the protesters or provocateurs at that point in time, and you can put them together for yourself. The reason why I'm not putting any more into this is because the video is already long enough as it is. Now I want to talk about the actual comparison between the UK and the US, and is it justifiable that these Black Lives Matter are so annoyed, angry, feel aggrieved by the UK police overall? Is it somehow justified? And I really want to have a look at this. So let's start off with a story from Star Wars actor John Boyega. So this is from Sky News, and this is going on about a protest that was happening in Hyde Park, where everything was, to begin with, you know, peaceful and everything else like that, where there were still tens of thousands of people that were in attendance, and they are obviously adhering to social distancing and so on and so forth. But let's get to the real crux of the argument, should we? The reason why Black Lives Matter, by John Boyega's own admission, are so annoyed about what's going on in the UK, right? And how they feel that the police are still acting racist and still doing all of these horrible, horrible things, that you think that he's going to have lists of what's going on, right? He's going to have lists of people that have been inherently hurt by what's gone on by the UK police, right? Yeah, let's read. Star Wars actor John Boyega was at Hyde Park protest and gave an emotional speech where he referenced two other black Americans who controversially died in the US, as well as the racist UK murder of Stephen Lawrence, which was definitely a racist attack, or at least motivated by. So moving down, one of the famous quotes for him at this minute in time is, he told demonstrators, "We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd, which was murdered by a US police officer, was downright murdered, condemned by other officers, condemned by the Republicans, condemned by the Democrats, condemned by everyone." Right? Carrying on. "We are a physical representation of our support for Sandra Bland." Now, if anybody doesn't know who Sandra Bland is, I have linked to her news article down below. Please have a read of it. Now, the police officer in question definitely overstepped his mark to be able to bring her in. In actual fact, was caught lying to the reason why he brought her in, but didn't kill her. In actual fact, she unfortunately committed suicide. Again, you could argue that events led to her suicide, but she took her own life. Nowhere, shape or form, anywhere near the same as George Floyd. "We are a physical representation of our support for Trayvon Martin." Again, this is a very complex situation, but guess what? The police were not involved in his death. Not by one iota were the police involved in Trayvon Martin's death. But somehow that represents the police, systemic racism, and the idea that the government in itself, especially the UK in this instance, is racist. Because all three of these sentiments and examples are from the US. Now, we move on to, "We are a physical representation of our support for Stephen Lawrence." Now, if anybody doesn't know who Stephen Lawrence is In the 90s, unfortunately, the young lad Stephen Lawrence was chased from a bus stop by some white thugs and then stabbed in Peckham in a housing estate. As sad as this isn't a representation of the UK police. The police had no link and no representation in his murder. I do not understand how this is justification for doing anything towards the UK police. I can't understand how this is justification for any of it. But according to Black Lives Matter and John Boyega, this is the reasons for the protests. Right? These are the reasons. So now that we got the reasoning and rationale out of why Black Lives Matter in the UK are protesting, which is mainly to do with the solidarity movement, and I completely understand that, but how now some people are trying to claim that it is against the racist UK police. Now, if you have to go back to a Stephen Lawrence case as your only justification for one, racism in the UK or a racist motivated attack, then you're kind of reaching. Second, and more importantly, Stephen Lawrence's death had nothing to do with the UK police. Had nothing to do with the UK police. So, how does that interlink with racist UK police and anybody giving any form of justification for any rioter going against and fighting the UK police? To me, it doesn't. But let's have a look at the actual statistics, shall we? From the BBC as well, mind you. So, what do the figures show? Over the past 10 years, 163 people have died in or following police custody. In England and Wales, according to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the body responsible for the police complaints. So, death in custody is the term for anybody who dies while in custody of the state. This could include while being detained by a police officer or while being held as a prisoner in a police station. So, of the deaths in the last 10 years, 140 of the 163 were white. Now, 13 of the 163 were black. 10 were for other minority ethnic groups. So 140 deaths by the police, or because of being held by the police, were 140. 13 of them were black. So, let's have a look at this, shall we? So, deaths in custody by ethnicity. White, 86%. And 85% of the deaths. This chart is to try and say that disproportionately, that it affects the population. 86% of the population is white according to the 2011 census, which is what they're doing. If anybody actually cares, that's 11 years old, that data. It's changed since then, but I can't think why they're using that, but let's carry on, shall we? 8% of the total deaths in custody. Asian 3%, mixed 2%, other 1%. Interesting. Interesting statistics there. Again, it's very, very similar. Very, very similar. Them trying to say that black people are overrepresented in arresting figures anyway, and that in itself proves disparity and racism for whatever reason. So, of those arrested, 79% were white, and 85% of those who died in custody were white. Meanwhile, 9% of the people arrested were black, which is disproportionately high, and 8% of those who died in custody were black. So over the last 10 years, a white individual who has been arrested was about 25% more likely to die in custody than a black individual who have been arrested. So a white person, even by BBC standards, of using a 2011 census, of trying to say that even disproportionately high representation of black people being arrested, you are still, in UK police hands, 25% more likely to die in custody if you are white. So, how is this anything to do with justification of going after apparent racist police officers in the UK? Where is your justification for this? To simply answer that question, I don't actually see any justification whatsoever in Black Lives Matter, BLM, the protests in the UK at least, from actually attacking or trying to physically, emotionally, or whatever threaten even the UK police, because the statistics are just not there to back up their assertion. There are no cases to back up their assertions. Now, do you think that I am sitting here, standing here, trying to suggest that there is no racism within police? Because you'd be wrong. Every form of individual system of hierarchy will have individuals that may express or may have tendencies of racism, bigotry, or hatred inside of their systems. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to sit here and say there's no such thing as racism anymore. There are people that are still racist. Are you telling me that from those individuals that then makes the whole system, especially the police in this case, racist? If your answer is yes, again, the statistics that are being used even by the BBC disprove your assertion. There is no reason for you guys to stand there and scream and shout saying that the UK's police are racist police. The statistics, the caseload does not bear you out by any stretch of the imagination. So, my answer is no. There are no need for Black Lives Matter to protest and physically attack the media as stated in this video, as well as the police in this video, especially when they are doing their job and being provoked into certain actions by provocateurs. Now, again, I showed you evidence of that. That doesn't necessarily, again, mean that there aren't police that would gladly do it if the cameras are not watching. That's not what I'm stating. But to claim that the individuals represent the whole of the hierarchy, the whole of the system, doesn't bear you out. Just a baseless assertion based on feelings rather than the actual statistics itself. Now, rather than reiterating everything, I want to show where I actually support the protests. Now, me myself, yeah, I think the numbers are ridiculous. I think the idea of social distancing is never ever going to be able to be upholden in a form of a protest, and that kind of goes out the window anyway. But I understand the reasoning why they seem, or said to, at least at the beginning, protesting. And that was in solidarity. And I think that is a good and a touching and amazing effect for people to be able to see, and for people to show that they are actually thinking about what's going on, and it's not acceptable to have these types of things happen from the police. But again, it does seem to think and feel that these are still excuses for certain types of people to go out of their way to express anger in general at authority figures rather than them actually trying to change power or change the dynamic of what's going on. In actual fact, they're reinforcing that dynamic by, as I said, chasing 2 police officers down the road to try and beat them, and then laughing at them all the way down the road, trying to say suck your mum or suck your dad for that particular reason. It makes no goddamn sense. None whatsoever. I cannot support any of that. How these landmarks here are being defaced. How people climbing all over the cenotaph to make it look like they're being held in bondage. I cannot support that. I just cannot. How you would deface and decry how you have been treated by destroying the memory of others makes no sense. And that's why I can't support these protests and in turn these rioters. Thank you very much for watching and listening. If you've liked this video, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe. And I thank you for watching this video and taking the time out of your day to do that. Thank you very much. Speak to you all again real soon. Bye bye for now. Take care.